Good afternoon, everyone. So with the news that Apple has finally moving its phones from the Lightning connector there to USB-C like that, I thought it might be a good time to talk about power supplies in the PC world, well, really in the Apple computer world primarily, although this has impacts for many PC manufacturers as well. What I want to talk about are two things. I want to talk about cables and connectors, and I also want to talk about the power supplies themselves. So, what have we got here? We have a, I think this is a 61 watt Apple power supply. This one is probably an 85 watt if it says on it. I'd have to do the math. And this is a power supply for a netbook. It's kind of a bit of a stand-in for the PC world. We have a more recent USB-C power supplies here, and this is a USB-C one as well. So, let's start by talking about the connectors. In the PC world, we have a variety of different kinds of connectors that are used. A lot of barrel connectors of this type. And every manufacturer used their own, but there was nothing terribly special about these. And that meant that third-party power supplies have been widely available for PCs for ages. Apple, on the other hand, eventually went to a magnetic power supply with a magnetic connector, which was great. The idea here is that if you trip over your cable, you don't pull your laptop off the coffee table. That's a great idea. The problem is that this was a heavily patent encumbered thing. This talks to the computer to give it the state of the power light and that sort of stuff. So not only is there are these pins carrying information about, well, carrying power, they're also carrying data. And that meant that there were relatively few third-party power supplies, if any, during this era. Apple eventually moved to USB-C power supplies with USB-C plugs. This is just a generic one here. And, well, there was some issue about finding cables that would actually support the power rate, especially early on. That was great because you could buy this power supply, but you could also buy that power supply. So for the first time, and the prices on these became extremely low quite quickly. So for the first time for Apple users, you could stash a power supply at the office, you could have one at home, and you could carry the cable back and forth, or you could have multiple cables, whatever you liked. And this took a fairly heavy brick, this one's not quite as bad, out of your laptop case when you were traveling. So that became quite useful. In the PC world, many things moved towards these kinds of connectors, but because there was some trouble with USB-C cables, there was some retrenchment. So early on, a lot of netbooks used USB-C power supplies, then they drifted away, and then they drifted back, and all that. But in general, the move away from this sort of thing to USB-C was really helpful because it meant you could buy a power supply from any manufacturer you wanted. You'd hope it would have some sort of certification. This one has a German certification, not a North American certification. The same thing with this one too. I don't know why they've done that, as opposed to CSA, which was Canadian or UL. Anyway, but at least they've got some safety certification, which is nice. That's a requirement, I think, for buying any of these things. But you didn't have to worry about it, right? You could buy a power supply that had an adequate wattage for your device, 30 watts for the current MacBook Airs is adequate, although they will use a 60 watt power supply and take advantage of it if you happen to have one. I think this one's 60 watts too. But you just needed a standard cable. And that made life really easy, and this cable could charge many other things as well, and of course you could get something like this up a USB-C to lightning cable, and now suddenly you're carrying just one power supply and a couple of cables, and you've got everything taken care of. The problem was, of course, is that you don't have this. You don't have a magnetic MagSafe, as Apple's branding. You don't have a magnetic quick release cable anymore. You can pull your laptop off the desk or off the coffee table more easily. So Apple reintroduced MagSafe with a USB-C at the end, so presumably this just pulls out USB-C in some way. This is, of course, now a still a patent-encumbered thing, so you're not going to be able to buy these from third parties, I believe, but you can plug it into any other power supply. The other thing that Apple's done, which is fortunate, is that you can still charge those computers using the USB-C port. So you don't have to use the power port. You can use any of the USB-C ports to power it. So you can say, you know what? I'm not going to pull the laptop off my desk at the office. So I'm going to leave that at home, and I'm going to keep that at the office and just plug everything in via USB-C and not have to mess around with it. That sounds like a small thing, right? But what it means is that you can now buy relatively inexpensive power supplies, stash them where you want, continue to use this. You get the benefits of MagSafe if you want to use it, but you don't have to. And you don't have to worry about these sorts of power supplies with cables that break and are soldered in, or figuring out which barrel connector is correct for your device. You're now out of this world, and you just have to deal with these. And now that, of course, your phone is going to, assuming you're in the Apple world, already happened if you're in the Android world, of course, assuming your phone is USB-C, you don't have to worry about any other connector except for, legacy gadgets that are still using something else. So now you're in the position where you can possibly get away with carrying that to charge just about everything. Or that, or that. Doesn't matter, because they're all compatible. So for those of us who carry our gadgets around a lot, USB-C is actually a huge lifesaver, and it's been a very significant improvement. So this little pouch thing, it's got an extra transit card in it, but it can contain that and that and that if you fold it up, roll the cables up more finely, and that gives you a relatively light, relatively convenient way to be able to charge anything. Well, this will cover everything that I need. If you put in a mini USB, it would be able to charge absolutely everything that I've got. Oh, with the exception of a couple of radios that are, micro USB. There's still a couple of mini USB things around, but I don't need those for traveling or for going back and forth to the office. So we're in a pretty good moment in terms of this, with Apple getting rid of this stuff, and with almost everything else turning to USB-C, a decent quality cable and a power supply, and you can charge everything. So that's great, right? Well, the other thing that's gone on is that these have gotten smaller. These two at the top are both, if I remember correctly, 60, 61 watt power supplies. These two, this is Apple's standard 30 watt power supply, and this is, a number of these are manufactured by different people. This one seems okay. I've just got it, so I don't know. I won't recommend any off-brand power supply, but this U-Green one seems all right. It's got a foldable. It's a little thicker, but it's a little smaller. So we're now in a situation where you can have a relatively slim package for your power supply that charges everything. And that's just a huge change from this, because guess what? This doesn't charge anything but your computer. You want to charge your phone with it, you got to plug it into the computer, then you got to find this cable. Right? So what do? You carry a phone, you carried a separate phone charging cable. Now that seems like a small thing. The ability to carry, that and charge all your gadgets seems like a small thing, but in fact is a huge improvement in convenience for those of us who travel around, whether internationally or even just around the same city. That's a huge improvement. And, it doesn't matter which power supply you have. I like them little, but you can use the Apple one if you want. No problem there, right? And that handles everything. So, when we talk about USB-C charging and you see how Apple people are thrilled with Apple being forced to get rid of this, it's because everybody just wants to be able to use one charger for everything and have done with it. And this is something that we haven't been able to do if we were in the iPhone world for a while. Android people have been able to, but then not all the computers use this, right? So what we've had is we've had a real disconnect between what Apple has been doing in the computer power supply world, which is very well thought out. Providing a return to MagSafe, which was really demanded by people, but maintaining compatibility with USB-C charging was very smart and very forward-thinking. But sticking around with this for all last time, not so much. So we've finally gotten away from this disconnect between what Apple's been doing in the portable realm and what they've been doing in the computer realm. So what they've been doing with their phones and what they've been doing with their computers. We finally get a convergence on a sensible approach to a kind of universal charger which should handle everything. Now that said, it's not all perfect. There's a real issue in terms of finding cables that will both carry data. This one claims to carry full speed on these things, and also carry relatively high wattage outputs that you need for computers. So the problem has in many ways shifted from the chargers, which are pretty easy to buy now, to USB-C cables, which has become a bit of a morass if you don't know what's going on with them. Anyway, hope this was interesting. Thanks for watching.